Welcome back to another day in the arena, and this video is going to be a break in my playthrough of each of these starter decks, and it's just something I've noticed. And what I've noticed is that Grave Secrets and Arcane Aggression are the only decks I truly liked and thought did really well, and I think there's a very specific reason why. And if you give me just a few moments of your time, we will go over that. Let's start off with High Flying Valor, which will be the next video in this series. And while I think this deck is decent enough for a free deck, I also see some major flaws of the thought process behind constructing this deck. We do have one copy of Merrill, we have one copy of the Valiant Veteran, we have one copy of the Siege Veteran here. But a lot of the times, you're going to have 2 or 3 tapped lands in your hand to start the game, and you'll have a couple of big 5-drops. And that just doesn't work for a fast deck like Soldiers is trying to be. Very fast, quick to the ground, able to control a little bit of the field, just enough to make sure that you're safe and get the damage off with Harbin, Vanguard, Aviator as fast as possible into the game. You can't really do that with one copy though. You also can't really grow your guys individually with the Siege Veteran because, again, you've only got one copy, and same with the Valiant Veteran. The biggest weakness of this deck, however, is the slow card draw, which comes from Recruitment Officer. In a lot of respects, that's your main way of drawing cards, getting cards into your hand. And yes, you're targeting creatures 3 or less with it, right? Yep, 3 or less. But the thing is, you got all these 4, 5, and 6 drops over here that are mucking up your choices. Recruitment Officer should always be getting a card. But here's the thing, you remove 2 or 3 creatures from this deck early on, you have 9 non-creatures in here. If you don't have any creatures, you're just dead. And the creatures that we do have are cast later in the game whenever control is usually having a great time at this point. Same goes with stuff like Growing Hope, which we don't have a lot of mana dorks. We have Kami of Whispered Hopes, which is a mana dork and a very good mana dork, but only 2 copies of it. You also have very limited ways, again, of drawing cards. And I'm looking through it now, and I don't see any ways of actually getting more cards into your... Oh, wait, you have the Dusk Legion Duelist. 1 copy, 1 chance to draw 1 card per turn if everything happens perfectly. Yeah, big weakness, big weakness. That's really tough to never be able to draw more cards. So again, if your opponent has 1 or 2 removal spells, you're done. It's over. It's adios. Bye-bye. Arcane Aggression, however, does not suffer from that downfall. Not only do you have 3 cards that actually draw more cards with Meeting of Minds, you also have 2 curators that are able to put instances and sorceries from your graveyard on top of your library. Great removal with Flame of Anor, Lightning Strike, and a Volcanic Spite, and ways to populate the board outside of that. Also ways of even protecting creatures, and a Najal, which is just fantastic to overwhelm an opponent very rapidly if it's not handled. And there's not a whole lot of ways to handle it because, yeah, sure, we got these fight spells here, but 4/4 is your toughest guy, so you literally have to have this epic confrontation on the field in order to kill the Najal. And that's not really going to be very helpful, especially, again, this card also suffers from the inability to draw more cards. When we think of basic matchups, we think about control beats mid-range, right? Mid-range beats aggro, and aggro beats control. One of the major problems with having a dedicated aggro deck, which High Flying Valor should be a dedicated aggro, so should Growing Hope should be a dedicated aggro, or at least have more ways to protect your creatures, more ways to draw cards so that you can get into that mid-range healthily. One of the main disadvantages for these decks in having a dedicated aggro is simply, and we go to the best representation of aggro that we have in this set, which is a Rebel Army. I'm looking forward to this video, by the way. But you do have 8 copies of mana that come in tapped. And that is a big ask for an aggro deck. A tapped land kills aggro fast. In High Flying Valor, not only do we have very expensive things that we are likely going to draw in our opening hand and don't really have many ways outside of Sky Strike Officer to draw more cards, but we have 8 tapped lands that come in. And there is no situation where these come in untapped, and that is very dangerous. So it can't be a dedicated aggro with tapped lands. Now, I've seen Rebel Army be a very dangerous deck, or Rebel Armory be a very dangerous deck in a lot of situations. It does need a little bit of time to pick up and go from what I've seen. Have not played with this one yet. Looking forward to doing that with you guys. But the very fact that these tapped lands are in the deck make me think that it's going to be slower than it otherwise ought to be. On the other hand, control players are not worried so much about tapped lands coming onto the battlefield, because you're waiting to react to what your opponent is doing. And if you know that opponent is going to be slow to the field, you have an even higher advantage whenever you go into these rounds. Especially if you know the decks, frontwards and backwards. Murder is going to be fantastic to take out things that are actually important. Tribute to Urborg is going to be able to get those early game creatures that will become a problem if certain combos are met off of the board. It's just fantastic. The more knowledge a control player has, the better. And knowing the deck frontwards and backwards, first off, that is a huge advantage to understand exactly what the opponent is bringing to the table. Second off, control doesn't really care about tapped lands coming onto the field. In fact, like you'll see a lot of big Esper builds in Historic that play a lot of the tap land Scry 1. You'll see that a lot because they don't care if their land comes in tapped. They're probably not doing anything on that turn anyway. And if they are, they probably have the card advantage of being able to play a land that comes in untapped, like either an island or a swamp, to get that 1 mana needed for Breach, the Multiverse. Yeah, control is going to reign supreme in an area like that. This is not bashing on the other decks in here. As said, I have not played Legions to Phyrexia yet, Rebel Army, Savage Scavengers, Scrapyard Sacrifice, or the Sylvan Wisdom. We have not played through those decks yet. I've seen Sylvan Wisdom be very good. I've seen Rakdos be good on occasion. But if you want to get in here and get your daily wins and have a high win rate with those daily wins, Grave Secrets and Arcane Aggression, from what I'm seeing so far, are going to be your 2 main big bad meanie decks in this area. And the reason is because there can be no dedicated aggro in here. Therefore, control always has the advantage. It is a real shame that I played these 2 decks before the other ones, because now I have a tainted view of what I'm seeing with these other decks. And once I saw all the tap lands, the control players always winning in all of them, almost exclusively winning if they play the decks well. If they play the decks poorly, you got a good chance, but if they're playing the decks well and they're building up mana bases, you know it's only a matter of time before that control player wins, especially with the fairly heavy amount of removal in these decks. Flame of Anor, Volcanic Spite, Lightning Strike, and I think that's all for this one. I would certainly hope so, because that's an awful lot for one of these starter decks. If you remove 2 or 3 creatures from the opponent, the game is over. And that's why I think that these decks are better. The lack of card draw in any of these decks outside of Grave Secrets and Arcane Aggression. And I just want to hammer home that point that there are ways that you could be drawing cards in Standard. It's not super unheard of at all, such as, well, green is able to play cards from the top of the library with the Augur of Autumn. Also, you have things like the World Tree, which is able to draw a card if you play a creature whose power is 3 or greater. And if it's smaller, you put 2/1/1 counters on it. That's exactly what green wants to be doing. Drawing cards to ramp into the bigger things. And then with the smaller things, you want to be putting 1/1 counters on them to making them a little bit bigger and more dedicated blockers, or even growing your field out large enough to actually swing in. So there are ways that they could have added card advantage. I actually wonder, looking at how good the control decks are versus how inconsistent the almost dedicated mid-range decks are, whether the left hand wasn't talking to the right hand when crafting these, because obviously these two decks are far superior to Charging Ahead, Growing Hope, and Flying Valor from what I've played, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Heck, with High Flying Valor or Growing Hope, I would have actually preferred just forests and plains. Forests, plains, and that's it. If you didn't want to give out rare lands, you should have just went with forests and plains wizards. That's what you should have done, because tapped lands are not good in a deck that wants to be fast. I'm not speaking for all of these decks. We will do that after we cover the rest of these decks on this channel, but that's what I see so far, and it is kind of a trend that I thought would make an important video. If you're a new player and you're trying to learn these archetypes and you keep getting killed by Grave Matters and Arcane Aggression, well, maybe switch over to Rebel Army, which I think has the better opportunity to beat Grave Secrets and Arcane Aggression, or switch over to Arcane Aggression or Grave Secrets. Arcane Aggression is probably the easiest playline, and then Grave Secrets is a little bit more of a complicated playline, but it seems a little bit more consistent. But that is just a thought, guys. I just wanted to put this thought out there on what decks I think are really good that I played so far versus not so good, and the reasons why. Thank you for joining today. Make sure that you've liked the video and subscribed to the channel, and I will see you next time. Bye.